Have you ever had a memory so perfect, so bathed in golden light, that you hold it in your mind like a precious snow globe? You know the kind. A perfect Thanksgiving, the scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon, the sound of laughter echoing through a warm, crowded house, the sight of your family, all of them, happy and together. It's a snapshot of everything that's supposed to be good and right in the world. You hold on to that image because it feels safe. It feels like home. Now, imagine taking that snow globe, that perfect, beautiful memory, and watching someone shake it so violently that all the happy little figures inside are buried in a blizzard of lies. Imagine discovering that the warmth, the laughter, the love was just a curtain, hung to hide something cold and dark and deeply, deeply wrong. I had a memory just like that. And this is the story of the day it was shattered forever. It's the story of how I walked away from the noise of a celebration and descended into a silence that screamed louder than any shout. It's the story of what I found in my own family's basement and the horrifying truth of why it was left there. Because that perfect Thanksgiving, the one that lives in my memory, is also the day I found my grandma, my Nana Evelyn, shivering in the dark while the rest of us celebrated just one floor above her head. My Nana Evelyn was the sun our family orbited around. She wasn't just a grandmother. She was the architect of our traditions, the keeper of our stories, the heart of our home. Her house, the one my mom grew up in, was our family's Mecca. It was a place of unconditional welcome, where the coffee pot was always on, and the cookie jar was never empty. Nana wasn't a frail, delicate old woman. Even in her late 70s, she had a fire in her, a sharp wit that could cut you down to size, and a laugh so loud and genuine it could make the windows rattle. She taught me how to bake, how to cheat at gin rummy, and how to stand up for myself. After my Grandpa Joe passed away a few years back, we all worried about her being alone in that big house. But she was resilient. "Your grandfather is still in every corner of this house," she'd say, a sad but strong smile on her face. "Leaving here would be like leaving him all over again." So my uncle, Mark, my mom's older brother, stepped in to help manage things. Mark was a financial advisor, a smooth talker in a sharp suit, the kind of guy who always seemed to be closing a deal on his Bluetooth. He got power of attorney, handled her bills, and managed her investments. "It's the least I can do," he'd say with a magnanimous wave of his hand. "Gotta make sure Mom is comfortable and secure." We all praised him for it. He was the responsible son, the good son, taking care of his aging mother. My mom, Sarah, was always so stressed, juggling her job and my dad and me, that she seemed relieved to pass the financial burden of her mother's care onto her brother. It all made perfect sense. It all seemed so right. The changes in Nana were subtle at first. We chalked them up to grief, then to old age. She started to seem more withdrawn. The fire in her eyes dimmed a little. She'd get confused sometimes, misplacing her keys or forgetting a name. When we'd visit, the house wasn't quite as immaculate as it used to be. My mom and my Aunt Karen, Mark's wife, would exchange worried glances. "She's starting to slip," Karen would whisper, her voice dripping with a kind of theatrical pity. "Mark says we need to be prepared for the inevitable decline." It became the family narrative. Poor Evelyn. She's just not who she used to be, and we all just accepted it. It's easier to accept a simple, sad story than a complicated, ugly one. This past Thanksgiving was supposed to be a big one. My Uncle Mark and his family were hosting at Nana's house. He had been pushing the idea for weeks. "Let's give Mom one more big holiday in her own home before, you know," he'd said, his voice heavy with false solemnity. It felt a little strange, having someone else host in Nana's kitchen, but we went along with it. When we arrived, the house was buzzing. My Aunt Karen had gone all out with decorations. Music was playing. A dozen conversations were happening at once. It was the picture of holiday cheer. I saw Nana when we first got there. She was sitting in her usual armchair by the fireplace, looking small and lost in the chaos. I knelt down beside her. "Hey, Nana," Happy Thanksgiving. She looked at me, and for a second I saw a flicker of the old fire, a spark of recognition. Alex, she whispered, her hand gripping mine. Her hand was ice cold. They're moving the walls, she said, her voice a dry rustle. I frowned. What walls, Nana? But before she could answer, my Aunt Karen swooped in, a bright, fake smile plastered on her face. There you are. Alex, come help your uncle with the wine. Evelyn, dear, let's not bother the kids with silly stories. She patted Nana's hand condescendingly and steered me away. I looked back, and I saw the spark in Nana's eyes die out, replaced by a familiar, foggy vacancy. An hour later, as everyone was gathering in the dining room, the laughter and clinking glasses reaching a crescendo, a cold feeling washed over me. I hadn't seen Nana since I'd been pulled away from her chair. I scanned the crowded room. She wasn't there. I checked the living room, the kitchen, her bedroom. Nothing. Hey, Mom, I asked. Have you seen Nana? My mom, busy helping Karen with the gravy, just waved a dismissive hand. Oh, she probably got tired and went to lay down in her room for a bit. She does that. Don't worry about it. But I was worried. That cold hand, her strange words. It didn't feel right. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. On a hunch, a strange, inexplicable pull. I walked away from the warmth of the kitchen, through the quiet hallway, and towards the door that led to the basement. The basement was my grandpa's old workshop. It was always kept locked. But when I tried the knob, it was open. The air that seeped out from the crack in the door was frigid and smelled of damp earth and something else. Something like decay. I pulled the string for the single, bare bulb at the top of the stairs, and a weak yellow light illuminated the steep wooden steps leading down into the darkness. And that's when I heard it. A small, rhythmic sound. A chattering. I took a breath, my heart pounding, and I walked down those stairs. The cold intensified with every step. The basement was cluttered with old furniture under white sheets, like ghosts in a graveyard. And there, in the farthest, darkest corner, huddled on an old wooden crate, was my grandmother. She was wearing just a thin house dress, her arms wrapped around herself, her body shaking uncontrollably. Her teeth were chattering, a desperate, lonely sound in the vast, cold silence. She wasn't just cold. She was shivering with a terror so profound it seemed to emanate from her in waves. And as I got closer, I saw she was clutching something to her chest, a small, worn leather book, and she was whispering the same two words over and over again, like a prayer, like a warning. Solid foundation, she whispered, her voice a ghost in the dark. Solid foundation. If you've ever had that feeling, that chilling realization that the reality you know is a lie, then you know the journey I was about to begin. If you want to come down into the cold with me and uncover a secret that was meant to stay buried forever, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You are officially a witness, and the testimony is just getting started. Seeing my grandmother huddled in that freezing, subterranean darkness was like a punch to the gut. The world upstairs, the laughter, the warmth, the smell of roasted turkey seemed like a sick, twisted dream. This was the only thing that was real. My Nana, the matriarch of our family, the woman who had hosted decades of these very holidays with warmth and open arms, was shivering on a wooden crate in her own basement, as if she were a forgotten refugee. My mind couldn't process it. 1,000 questions exploded in my head. How did she get down here? How long had she been here? Why was she so terrified? I rushed to her side, my own breath fogging in the frigid air. Nana? Nana! It's me, Alex. What are you doing down here? My God, you're freezing. I knelt in front of her. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light, and her lips had a bluish tint. She was clutching a small, worn, leather-bound book to her chest, so tightly her knuckles were white. It looked like an old diary or a ledger of some kind. Her eyes were wide with a fear I had never seen before, and they darted around the dark corners of the basement as if she were expecting something to leap out at her. She didn't seem to fully register my presence. She just kept whispering, her voice a fragile, chattering thing. Solid foundation. Joe, they can't find it. The foundation has to be solid. Joe was my grandfather. The way she said his name, it was like she was talking to him, like he was right there in the darkness with us. I gently touched her arm. It felt like a block of ice. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. I had to get her out of there. I took off my thick flannel shirt and wrapped it around her frail shoulders. Okay, Nana. We're going upstairs. We're going to get you warm. She resisted at first, a surprising strength in her grip as she clutched the little book. No, no. It's not safe up there. The walls are listening, she whispered, her eyes wild. Her words made no sense, but her terror was profoundly real. I put my arm around her, practically lifting her off the crate. She was so light, so fragile. It felt like carrying a bird with a broken wing. As I helped her up the steep basement stairs, she kept looking back into the darkness, as if leaving a part of herself behind. The moment I opened the basement door and the warmth and noise of the party washed over us, the transformation was instantaneous and jarring. My Uncle Mark was the first to see us. He was standing in the hallway, a glass of red wine in his hand, laughing at something my dad had said. The laughter died on his lips, and his face, for a barest fraction of a second, contorted into a mask of pure fury. It was so fast, I almost thought I'd imagined it. Then, just as quickly, it was replaced by a look of deep, concerned sorrow. "Mother, what on earth happened?" he exclaimed, rushing over and taking her other arm. My Aunt Karen and my mom came running from the kitchen, their faces a mixture of alarm and something else. Annoyance. "Evelyn, my God, you'll catch your death!" Karen shrieked, her voice an octave too high. "What were you thinking, wandering off like that?" The focus was immediately on Nana as the problem, the source of the disruption. No one asked how she got down there. No one asked why. The narrative was already being written for them. Poor, confused Evelyn had a senior moment and got herself lost. I tried to explain. "I found her in the basement. She's frozen. She was just sitting in the dark. She was terrified of something." My Uncle Mark shot me a look, a quick, sharp glance that was both a warning and a dismissal. "Alex, thank you for finding her," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative, taking complete control of the situation. "She's been having these little spells. She gets confused and wanders. We were just talking about how we might need to get her some more advanced care." He was speaking about her as if she wasn't even there, as if she were a piece of furniture that had been misplaced. He and my mom guided Nana towards her bedroom, the little leather book still clutched in her hand. My Aunt Karen turned to the few guests who had witnessed the scene, offering a tight, apologetic smile. "Just a little confusion, everyone. She gets tired on big holidays. You know how at Island now. Who wants another slice of pie?" She was a master of damage control, sweeping the ugliness under the rug of social niceties before it could stain her perfect party. I stood there in the hallway, my flannel shirt still around Nana's shoulders, feeling like I had just stepped into an alternate reality. The party just resumed. The volume of the conversations went back up. The laughter started again. It was as if the horrifying tableau I had just witnessed had never happened. My dad came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Son, you did a good thing, finding her. She just gets lost in her own head sometimes." He looked uncomfortable, his eyes avoiding mine. He wanted it to be simple. They all did. They needed it to be the sad, manageable story of a woman losing her mind to old age. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the basement air, that it wasn't that simple. I saw the flash of fury in my uncle's eyes. I saw the calculated performance of his concern. I heard the condescension in my aunt's voice. They weren't scared for her. They were scared of her, of the disruption she was causing. And Nana's words, They're moving the walls. It's not safe up there. The walls are listening. It wasn't the rambling of a confused mind. It was the language of a prisoner. She wasn't wandering off. She was hiding. And the thing she was hiding from was upstairs, drinking wine and carving the turkey. Later that evening, after they had put Nana to bed, my uncle firmly closing her bedroom door and telling everyone to let her rest, I saw him take the small leather book from her nightstand. She had finally fallen asleep, and her grip had loosened. He glanced at it for a moment, his expression unreadable, and then he slipped it into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He thought no one was watching, but I saw him. I saw him take the one thing she was clinging to for dear life. In that moment, the vague unease that had been churning in my stomach all day solidified into a cold, hard conviction. Something was terribly wrong in this house. My family wasn't protecting my grandmother. They were managing her. They were controlling her. And I was the only one who seemed to see it. The celebration upstairs felt like a grotesque mockery. They were celebrating the success of their own deception. And I knew, standing there in the fake warmth and the fake cheer, that I couldn't let it go. I had to find out what was in that book. I had to find out what solid foundation meant. I had to find out what my grandmother was so afraid of. The days following that disastrous Thanksgiving were thick with a cloying, artificial peace. The official family story, distributed via phone calls and carefully worded texts from my Uncle Mark and my mom, was that Nana had a mild turn due to overstimulation. It was a neat, tidy explanation that solicited sympathetic sighs and knowing nods from the rest of the family. It was a lie, and I knew it was a lie. But it was the lie everyone was willing to live with. To question it was to be disruptive, to be dramatic, to be, as my mom told me in a strained phone call, unhelpful. "Alex, your uncle has things under control," she'd said, her voice tight with a warning. "He's looking into getting her an in-home caregiver. Stirring up trouble with your wild imagination isn't going to help anyone." Her words were meant to shut me down, but they did the opposite. They fueled the fire of my suspicion. Why was everyone so desperate to control the narrative? What were they so afraid of me finding out? I couldn't get the image of my uncle pocketing Nana's leather book out of my mind. It was a brazen act of theft, committed in plain sight. That book was the key. She was protecting it, even in her terrified, confused state. It was the one thing she wouldn't let go of. I became obsessed with it. I had to get it back, or at least see what was inside. My first thought was to confront my uncle directly, but I immediately dismissed it. He was too smooth, too polished. He would deny it, gaslight me, and paint me as a hysterical, paranoid nephew. He would turn my own parents against me even more than they already were. No, a direct assault was a fool's errand. I had to be smarter than that. I had to be quieter. I had to become a detective in my own family. My chance came the following weekend. My uncle and aunt were hosting a post-holiday open house at their own home, a large, ostentatious McMansion in a gated community about 40 minutes away. It was the kind of event my parents felt obligated to attend. I made my excuses, claiming I had a huge project for work that I couldn't get out of. After they left, the house was mine. But I wasn't going to my uncle's house. I was going to Nana's. I still had the spare key she'd given me years ago, the one she'd told me to keep for emergencies. This felt like an emergency. Driving to her house, my stomach was a knot of anxiety and guilt. I felt like a burglar, sneaking into a place that had always been a source of comfort and love. The house looked different now, colored by the darkness of what I suspected was happening within its walls. It looked lonely, letting myself in. The silence was profound. The lingering smells of the Thanksgiving feast were gone, replaced by the faint, stale scent of old wood and potpourri. It felt empty. Not just of people, but of the life and warmth Nana had always filled it with. I went straight to her bedroom. It was tidy, too tidy. My Aunt Karen's handiwork, no doubt. The bed was perfectly made. There was a glass of water on the nightstand. It was the picture of care, but it felt as sterile and impersonal as a hotel room. Nana wasn't here. My uncle had moved her into their home for a few days for observation, a move that now seemed less about care and more about control. It gave him an excuse to be in her house, alone. I searched his guest room, the place he stayed when he was helping Nana. I looked everywhere for the little leather book in his drawers, his briefcase, under the mattress. Nothing. He was too smart to leave it somewhere so obvious. I felt a surge of frustration. I was wasting time. As I stood in the middle of her quiet living room, my mind racing, her words from the basement came back to me. Solid foundation. It had to mean something. It wasn't just random rambling. It was a clue. But what did it mean? The foundation of the house? I had already been in the basement. I had found her there, but I hadn't found what she was protecting. Or had I missed something? I went back to the basement door, my hand hesitating on the cold brass knob. Descending those stairs again felt like stepping back into a nightmare. I flicked on the single bare bulb, its weak light casting long, dancing shadows. The cold was just as I remembered it, a damp, biting chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I went to the far corner, to the wooden crate where she had been sitting. I ran my hands over the rough wood, searching for a loose board, a hidden compartment. Nothing. I scanned the concrete floor, looking for marks, scuffs, anything out of the ordinary. The floor was old and cracked, a spider web of ancient fissures. I started tapping the floor around the crate, listening for a hollow sound. Tap, tap, thud, tap, tap, thud. It was maddening. My eyes scanned the foundation walls, the rough-hewn stones that my grandpa had been so proud of. He had repointed the mortar himself decades ago. A house is only as good as its foundation, Alex, he used to tell me. Everything else is just decoration. His words echoed in my head. Solid foundation. I started examining the stonework near the crate. It was a wall of irregular gray and brown stones, fitted together like a complex puzzle. And then I saw it. One stone near the floor was a slightly different color, a darker, wetter shade of gray. It wasn't the stone itself, but the mortar surrounding it. It looked fresher, newer. My heart began to pound. I knelt down, my fingers tracing the line of the mortar. I pushed against the stone. It didn't budge. I pulled out my pocket knife and began to carefully scrape at the mortar. It was softer than the rest, crumbling away into a fine dust. It was a patch job. Someone had recently removed this stone and put it back. After 10 minutes of painstaking work, I had cleared enough of the mortar to get my fingers around the edge of the stone. I pulled. It was heavy, but it shifted. With a final, grunting heave, I pulled the stone free from the wall. Behind it was a dark, square cavity, just big enough to fit a small metal box. My hands were trembling as I reached into the cold, dark space. My fingers brushed against rusted metal. I pulled it out. It was an old, tin recipe box, the kind with a hinged lid, sealed shut with a small, simple padlock. It was heavier than a recipe box should be. I shook it. Something slid around inside with a soft, heavy thud. This was it. This had to be it. She wasn't just hiding in the basement. She was guarding this spot. This was her solid foundation. Now I just had to figure out how to get it open. Holding the cold, rusted tin box in my hands felt like holding the Rosetta Stone to my family's secrets. It was heavier than it looked, weighted with more than just its physical contents. This was what Nana was protecting. This was the solid foundation. The small, cheap padlock holding it shut seemed like a laughably inadequate defense for something so clearly important. I didn't have a key, and I wasn't about to leave it behind. I carried the box upstairs from the basement, my mind racing. I went into my grandpa's old workshop, a small, tidy space off the garage that my uncle had, thankfully, left untouched. Grandpa Joe had been a man who could fix anything, and his pegboard wall of tools was a testament to his life's philosophy. With the right tool, any problem could be solved. I found a pair of bolt cutters. With a single, satisfying snap, the padlock fell away. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I lifted the hinged lid. I was half expecting to find a stack of cash or some hidden jewelry. But what was inside was, at first glance, far more mundane and infinitely more intimate. There was no treasure, no smoking gun. Instead, the box was filled with a life. It was packed with old letters, tied in faded silk ribbons. There were bundles of photographs, their edges curled with age. There was a small velvet pouch containing a single tarnished silver dollar. And at the very bottom, beneath everything else, were two official-looking documents, folded neatly together. My grandfather's last will and testament, and a thick sheaf of papers that appeared to be the charter for a family trust. I sat down on my grandpa's old wooden stool, the scent of sawdust and oil, a comforting ghost in the air, and I began to read. I started with the letters. They were from my grandpa, written to my Nana during the first year of their marriage when he was stationed overseas in the army. I had always known my grandparents loved each other, but these letters were a revelation. They were a portrait of a young man deeply, passionately, and poetically in love with his wife. He wrote about his dreams for their future, for the house they would build, for the family they would raise. He wrote about his finances with a meticulous, almost obsessive detail, outlining how he was saving every penny to send back to her. "Put this in the foundation account, Evie," one letter read. "We build from the ground up. Solid. No shortcuts." The phrase jumped out at me. The foundation account. It was their name for their savings, their future. The photographs chronicled their life together. A young, hopeful couple on their wedding day. A proud new father holding my infant mother. Family vacations, birthdays, anniversaries. In every photo, my grandfather looked at my grandmother with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. And in every photo, my Nana looked strong, vibrant, and fiercely happy. This was the woman I remembered, the woman who had been buried under a fog of confusion and fear. Seeing her like this, so full of life, filled me with a profound sadness and a burning anger. What had they done to her? What had happened to this powerful, joyful woman? Then I turned to the legal documents. I'm no lawyer, but the will seemed straightforward. Upon my grandfather's death, all his assets were to be transferred into the Evelyn Vance Family Trust. I unfolded the trust document itself. It was long and dense with legalese, but the core tenets were clear. The trust was designed for one purpose: to provide for my grandmother's care, comfort, and well-being for the rest of her life. It stipulated that the house was to remain hers, that she was to be provided with the best possible medical care, and that the principal assets were not to be touched, only the interest and dividends used for her expenses, to ensure the money would last her lifetime. The most crucial page, however, was the one that named the trustee the person legally responsible for managing the trust. My grandfather had not named his son, Mark. He had named his lawyer and lifelong friend, a man named Howard Attinger, as the primary trustee, with my mother named as the secondary, to take over only upon Mr. Attinger's death or incapacitation. This was a bombshell. My uncle Mark, the financial wizard, the man who had swooped in to manage Nana's finances, had been deliberately cut out of any legal control by his own father. My grandfather, a man I knew to be shrewd and a keen judge of character, had not trusted his own son with his wife's future. He had foreseen something, some weakness or untrustworthiness in Mark, and had taken legal steps to protect his beloved Evie from it. So how was Mark in control now? How did he get power of attorney? He must have coerced Nana into signing it after my grandpa was gone, preying on her grief and confusion, convincing her and my mother that it was the logical, loving thing to do. He had usurped the role his father had explicitly forbidden him from having. The final piece of the puzzle was tucked into the back of the trust document. It was a handwritten ledger, penned in my grandfather's neat, precise script. The heading at the top of the page read, "Loans to Mark." What followed was a heartbreaking list, a chronology of my uncle's financial failures spanning over 20 years. There were loans for a failed restaurant venture, a bad real estate investment, a tech startup that never got off the ground. Each entry was dated, with the amount and a short note. Paid back in part. Defaulted. Forgiven for Sarah's sake. It totaled over $200,000. My grandparents had been bailing their son out his entire adult life. He wasn't a financial genius. He was a reckless gambler who was good at selling a story. And my grandfather had kept the receipts. I sat there in the silence of the workshop. The contents of the box spread out before me. The picture was now terrifyingly clear. My uncle wasn't helping his mother. He was using his power of attorney to systematically drain the very trust his father had set up to protect her. He was likely treating her money as his own personal slush fund, a way to finance his next big scheme or cover his old debts. The neglect, the gaslighting, the attempts to paint Nana as a confused, senile old woman, it was all part of the plan. If she was deemed incompetent, no one would listen to her. If she was isolated and scared, she wouldn't be able to tell anyone the truth. He wasn't just neglecting her, he was actively silencing her to facilitate a massive theft. The little leather book he had stolen from her, it was probably her own diary, her own record of what was happening. He took it because it contained her testimony, and I now held his father's testimony in my hands. This was no longer a family drama. This was a crime, and I had all the evidence I needed to prove it. Armed with the devastating knowledge from the tin box, my world shifted on its axis. The vague suspicion I'd been nursing had crystallized into a horrifying certainty. This wasn't just a case of an overbearing son and a neglected mother. This was a calculated, long-term campaign of financial elder abuse. My Uncle Mark wasn't just a smooth operator. He was a predator, and his own mother was his prey. The documents from the box, the will, the trust, my grandfather's damning ledger were a powerful indictment of his character. But they were historical. They proved my grandfather's intent and my uncle's past failures. But to stop what was happening now, I needed proof of his current crimes. I needed to see the bank statements. I needed to see the flow of money with my own eyes. Getting that information was the next daunting hurdle. I couldn't just walk into a bank and ask for my grandmother's financial records. Power of attorney gave my uncle a legal firewall that seemed impenetrable. Confronting him was out of the question. He'd just lock everything down tighter. I felt a surge of helpless rage. He had isolated Nana, controlled her finances, and manipulated the entire family into becoming his unwitting accomplices. He had built a perfect fortress of lies. But my grandpa's words from his letters echoed in my head. No shortcuts. Build from the ground up. I had to be methodical. I had to be patient. I had to find a crack in the wall. I spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilance, my mind constantly sifting through memories and conversations looking for a key. I thought about how my uncle operated. He was arrogant. He believed he was the smartest person in any room. Arrogance, I realized, can lead to carelessness. He wouldn't expect anyone, least of all his unhelpful and imaginative nephew, to be scrutinizing his actions. He would assume he was untouchable. This gave me a sliver of hope. The break came from an unlikely source, my own mother. I called her under the pretense of wanting to apologize for being difficult at Thanksgiving. I played the part of the chastened son, admitting I had probably overreacted. She was so relieved to hear it that her guard came down. I guided the conversation to Nana's health, and then, as casually as I could, to the logistics of her care. It must be a lot for Mark to handle, all of her bills and everything, I said sympathetically. Oh, you have no idea, she sighed. He's a saint. He set everything up online to make it easier. He has it all linked so he can pay her nursing home fees and pharmacy bills with just a click. He showed me once. It's all through the main City Trust Bank portal. Bingo, City Trust Bank. And an online portal. That was the crack I needed. Now came the ethically dubious part. The step that made my stomach churn with a mixture of guilt and determination. I had to try to get into that account. I knew it was a massive invasion of privacy, but I also knew, with every fiber of my being, that my grandmother's safety and solvency were at stake. I was choosing the lesser of two evils. I went to the bank's website and clicked on the forgot password link. It asked for the account holder's social security number and date of birth. I didn't know Nana's social, but I knew my mom would. I called her back a few hours later, this time with a more elaborate ruse. I told her I was applying for a scholarship that required information about my grandparents' heritage and birthplaces, and I wondered if she had any of her parents' old documents lying around. It was a flimsy excuse, but she bought it. "I think I have a copy of her old passport application somewhere," she said. "Let me look." 10 minutes later, she read me my grandmother's date of birth, place of birth, and blessedly, her social security number, all under the guise of helping me with my application. Every lie I told felt like a small piece of my soul chipping away, but I pushed the guilt down. The goal was too important. With her personal information, I passed the first security step. The next page was the real barrier. The security questions. What was the name of your first pet? What was your mother's maiden name? What was the make of your first car? My heart sank. These were things I couldn't possibly know. Or could I? I thought back to the tin box. It was a time capsule of her life. I pulled out the bundles of letters and photos and began to sift through them. Not for sentiment this time, but for data. In a letter from 1958, my grandpa wrote, "I hope you and little Rusty are keeping warm." Rusty. It had to be a dog. I typed it in. In the back of a photo of a young Nana standing with her mother, the name Eleanor Mayhew was written in faded ink. Her mother's maiden name. I typed it in. The last one was the car. I scanned photo after photo until I found it. A picture of Nana and Grandpa, beaming, standing next to a gleaming, brand-new 1962 Ford Falcon. I typed Ford Falcon into the last field, took a deep breath, and clicked Submit. Access granted. The screen refreshed, and I was in. I was looking at the dashboard of the Evelyn Vance Family Trust, and what I saw made the blood drain from my face. The account balance was terrifyingly low. It was a fraction of what it should have been, based on the value of the assets my grandfather had listed in the original trust document. I clicked on the activity log, my hand trembling as I scrolled through months, and then years, of transactions. It was a bloodbath. There were the expected payments, small sums to a pharmacy, a monthly payment to a utilities company, but they were dwarfed by the massive, systematic withdrawals. Huge sums of money were being transferred out every month to an account under the name Vance Capital Management, LLC. My uncle's company. $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 in a single transfer last June. He wasn't just taking a little off the top. He was gutting the trust. He was bleeding it dry. He had disguised the transfers with official-sounding memos. Market reallocation. Asset management fee. Capital investment. To a casual observer, it might have looked legitimate, but it was a complete sham. My grandfather's trust had explicitly stated that the principal was to be protected, not reallocated into his son's failing business. Further down, I saw something even more brazen. Large payments made directly from the trust to high-end car dealerships, a luxury travel agency, and the Oakwood Country Club. He wasn't just funding his business, he was funding his entire lavish lifestyle with his mother's life savings. He was paying his greens fees and booking his tropical vacations, while the woman who raised him was being left to shiver in a basement. The rage that filled me was cold and absolute. This was undeniable proof. This was cold, hard, digital evidence of grand larceny on a massive scale. I started taking screenshots, saving web pages, documenting every single fraudulent transfer. I saved everything to a secure, password-protected thumb drive. The loving son, the responsible financial manager, was a complete fabrication. My uncle was a common thief, a parasite who had latched onto his own mother. The lie had to end. It was time to burn his fortress to the ground, and I finally had the torch to do it. Staring at the digital trail of my uncle's theft, I felt a grim sense of validation mixed with a profound, soul-crushing sadness. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a fundamental betrayal of what it means to be family. My uncle had used the trust and love of his own mother as a weapon against her, and he had used the rest of us, our deference, our willful ignorance, as his shield. The evidence I had gathered was explosive, but I was at a crossroads. What was my next move? Go to the police? Hire a lawyer? The thought of bringing outsiders into this deeply personal mess, of turning my family into a public spectacle, a court case, was sickening. There was still a small, naive part of me that wanted to believe my mother was simply a pawn in all of this, that she was ignorant of the true extent of Mark's deception. If I could just show her the proof, I thought, she would be horrified. She would snap out of it. She would join me, and together we could confront Mark and fix this from within. It was a foolish hope, but one I clung to. I decided I had to give her that chance. I called her and asked if I could come over to talk. I said it was important, and my tone must have conveyed the urgency, because she agreed without argument. As I drove to my parents' house, the thumb drive containing the screenshots felt like a lead weight in my pocket. I rehearsed the conversation in my head 100 times, trying to find the right words to break through the wall of denial she had built around herself. I needed to be calm, logical, and present the evidence in a way she couldn't dismiss or explain away. I found her in the kitchen, nursing a cup of tea, her face etched with worry. "Alex, you're scaring me. What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't waste any time. "Mom," I began, my own voice steadier than I expected. "I know you don't want to hear this, and I know you trust Uncle Mark completely, but I've found some things you need to see. It's about Nana's money." Her face immediately hardened. "Alex, I told you to drop this. Your uncle is a financial professional. You're a graphic designer. What could you possibly know that he doesn't?" It was the condescension I had expected. "This isn't about financial strategy, Mom. This is about theft," I said, pulling out my laptop and the thumb drive. I plugged it in and opened the folder of screenshots. I got into Nana's trust account online. Her eyes widened in shock and anger. "You did what? That's illegal. How could you do something like that?" "I did it because Nana was shivering in a basement while her son was paying his country club dues with her money," I shot back, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. I turned the laptop towards her. "Just look, please. For her." I watched her face as she looked at the screen. I had organized the screenshots chronologically, starting with the massive transfers to Vance Capital Management LLC and ending with the most damning evidence: the payments for luxury cars, vacations, and golf memberships. I saw the flicker of comprehension in her eyes, the dawning horror as she recognized the names and the dates. She saw a payment to a resort in Hawaii and went pale. "Mark and Karen just got back from Hawaii," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The denial was starting to crack. She scrolled through the images, her breath catching in her throat. She saw the sheer volume of the withdrawals, the systematic draining of her mother's life savings. The proof was undeniable. The numbers didn't lie. For a moment, I thought I had gotten through to her. Her face crumpled, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Oh my God," she said, a gut-wrenching sob in her voice. "He told me he was investing it for her, making it grow. He said the statements would look complicated, but that it was all part of a long-term strategy. Mom, he's been lying to you. He's been lying to all of us," I said gently, leaning forward, thinking we were finally on the same side. "We have to do something. We have to stop him." And then, something in her shifted. The grief and horror on her face were slowly replaced by a look of panicked defensiveness. It was like watching a drawbridge being pulled up. She was retreating back into the fortress of denial. She shook her head, wiping away the tear. "No," she said, her voice hardening again. "No, there has to be an explanation. You don't understand these things, Alex. Maybe these are legitimate business expenses. Maybe the trust allows for it. Mark is my brother. He wouldn't do this to our mother. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Did you not just see the evidence with your own eyes? He's robbing her blind. He's using her money to live a lie. And Nana is the one paying the price. Don't you dare speak about your uncle that way, she snapped, her voice rising to a shout. She stood up, pushing the laptop away as if it were contaminated. You hacked into a private account. You're the one who broke the law. Mark has been under a lot of pressure. His business has been struggling. Maybe he just borrowed some of it. He would pay it back. The word borrowed hung in the air between us, a monument to her desperate, willful blindness. In that moment, I understood. She wasn't just Mark's pawn. She was his willing accomplice. The truth was too ugly, too devastating for her to accept. Accepting it would mean accepting her own failure to protect her mother. It would mean accepting that her perfect family was a sham. It would mean siding with her son against her brother, and the foundations of her world were too fragile for that. It was easier to vilify me, the messenger, than to confront the monster in her own family. So that's it? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that had been churning inside me. You're going to see all of this, know all of this, and you're going to do nothing? You're going to let him continue to destroy her? What I'm going to do, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear, is call my brother and tell him what you've done. You have gone too far, Alex. You need to stay out of this. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, a profound and painful severing of a bond I had trusted my entire life. I had lost more than just my faith in my uncle. I had lost my mother. She had chosen the lie over the truth. She had chosen her brother over her own mother's safety. I was completely and utterly alone in this. I packed up my laptop, my hands moving with a slow, deliberate calmness that I didn't feel. I see, I said quietly, looking at her one last time. I really do. I walked out of her house without another word, the door closing behind me on the smoking ruins of our relationship. The battle lines were drawn, and I was the only one on the side of the truth. Leaving my parents' house that day felt like stepping out of a familiar world and into a cold, alien landscape. The confrontation with my mother had been a catastrophic failure. Not only had she refused to help, but she had actively chosen to side with my uncle. She was going to warn him. The element of surprise, my only real advantage, was gone. I drove aimlessly for an hour, a storm of fury, grief, and panic raging inside me. Mark would be moving into damage control mode. He would lock down the online accounts, shred documents, and craft a new set of lies to explain away his actions. He would paint me as a delusional, malicious troublemaker. I had shown my hand too early, and now the enemy was forewarned and fortifying their defenses. I felt a crushing sense of defeat. What was my next move? Going to the police still felt like a nuclear option, one that would irrevocably destroy my family. And what if they didn't believe me? What if Mark, with his expensive lawyers and polished demeanor, managed to twist the narrative and claim this was all just a family misunderstanding over a loan? I needed something more. I needed a weapon so powerful, so irrefutable, that it would obliterate any lie he could possibly construct. The screenshots were damning, but they were digital. They could be disputed, explained away as out of context by a skilled liar. I needed something tangible, something my grandfather had put in place. My mind went back to the tin box, the will, the trust, the ledger, and something else my Grandpa Joe had written in one of his letters to Nana. Your lawyer, Howard Attinger, is a good man, as solid as the foundation of this house. Trust him before you trust anyone else, even our own blood. Howard Attinger, the trustee my grandfather had appointed. Why hadn't I thought of him sooner? I had been so focused on proving the crime that I hadn't thought about the man my grandfather had entrusted to prevent it. Was he still alive? Still practicing law? A quick search online gave me my answer. The law firm of Attinger, Ross and Klein was still very much in business downtown, and Howard Attinger was listed as a senior partner. A new plan began to form, a desperate, last-ditch strategy. Before I went to the police, I would go to him. He was the legally appointed trustee. He had a duty to protect my grandmother's assets. He would know what to do. But I couldn't just walk in with a handful of screenshots and a wild story. I needed to bring him the original documents, the ones from the tin box. I had made a terrible mistake leaving them in the workshop at Nana's house. With my mom's warning, my uncle would surely go there, looking for anything I might have found, anything she might have hidden. He would be looking for that box. I had to get back there before he did. My heart pounded with a new urgency as I raced back to Nana's house. I was in a race against my own uncle, a race to secure the truth before he could bury it forever. When I pulled up to the curb, I saw his silver Lexus in the driveway. My blood ran cold. I was too late. He was already inside. Panic seized me. I couldn't just walk in. He would call the police and have me arrested for trespassing. I had to get in without him knowing. I crept around to the back of the house, my mind racing, looking for any point of entry. A window left unlocked, a side door, and then I saw it. The old cellar door, the slanted storm doors that led directly into the basement from the backyard. They were old and usually bolted from the inside, but one of the hinges looked rusted and weak. With my adrenaline surging, I found a heavy piece of firewood from the woodpile and used it as a lever. I wedged it under the edge of the door and threw all my weight against it. The rusted metal groaned, then shrieked, and with a loud crack, the hinge gave way. I slipped through the opening into the familiar, musty darkness of the basement, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear him moving around upstairs, the floorboards creaking above my head. He was in the main part of the house, not yet in the workshop. I still had a chance. I moved through the shadowy basement as quietly as I could, my ears straining, listening to his footsteps. They were moving towards the back of the house, towards the garage and the workshop. He was looking for the box. I scrambled up the basement stairs, my hand on the doorknob that led into the kitchen. I took a deep breath and turned it, praying it wouldn't creak. I slipped into the house. The sound of my uncle rummaging through a closet in the hallway gave me cover. I darted into the workshop. The tin box was right where I had left it, sitting on the workbench. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, and tucked it under my jacket. I couldn't go back out the way I came in. I had to get out the front door. It was risky, but it was my only option. I crept down the hallway. I could hear him in Nana's bedroom now, opening and closing drawers. He was becoming more frantic, his movements louder, more agitated. He couldn't find her little leather book, and now he couldn't find whatever else he suspected I had discovered. I reached the front door. My hand was on the deadbolt when I heard his voice, sharp and angry, from down the hall. "Who's there?" He had heard me. I didn't hesitate. I threw the deadbolt, yanked the door open, and ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted to my car, the tin box clutched to my chest like a football. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. I got the car started just as the front door of the house flew open and my uncle appeared on the porch, his face a mask of incandescent rage. Our eyes met for a split second across the lawn. In that moment, all pretense was gone. He wasn't my charming, successful uncle anymore. He was a cornered, desperate man who had just seen the evidence of his crimes running out the door. He shouted my name, a guttural roar of fury, but I was already backing out of the driveway, my tires squealing on the pavement. I didn't stop driving until Nana's house was a small speck in my rearview mirror. I had the evidence, and now I had a witness to my theft of it. There was no turning back. My next stop was Howard Attinger's office. The endgame had begun. The drive to the law office of Attinger, Ross, and Klein was a blur of adrenaline and single-minded focus. I had the tin box on the passenger seat next to me, a cold, tangible symbol of the war I had just declared on my own family. The image of my uncle's face, contorted with rage as I sped away, was burned into my mind. He knew I had the evidence. He would be calling his lawyers, calling my parents, spinning a story of my instability, my theft. I had a very small window of time to get to someone who would listen, someone with the power to act, before Mark could poison the well. Howard Attinger's law office was exactly what you'd expect. Old brick, dark wood, the hushed, reverent silence of money and power. I walked in without an appointment, clutching a rusted tin box, my hair a mess, my heart still pounding from the confrontation. I must have looked like a madman. The receptionist, a prim, older woman, looked at me over the top of her glasses with undisguised skepticism. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she very much doubted it. "I need to see Howard Attinger," I said, my voice coming out breathier than I intended. "It's an emergency. It's about Evelyn and Joseph Vance." The mention of their names seemed to be a password. Her expression softened slightly. "Mr. Attinger is preparing for a deposition. He's not seeing anyone." "Please," I insisted, stepping closer to her desk and lowering my voice. "My name is Alex Miller. Evelyn is my grandmother. I have information that directly pertains to the trust my grandfather set up with him. It's a matter of criminal wrongdoing." I put the tin box on her desk. The finality of the sound, the metal clanking against the polished wood, seemed to convince her. She picked up her phone, spoke in a low voice, and a minute later, a door opened and a man emerged. Howard Attinger was in his late 70s, tall and thin, with a shock of white hair and eyes that were sharper and more perceptive than men half his age. He looked from me to the box on the desk, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Miller?" he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "My receptionist says you have something for me. You have 5 minutes." He led me into a cavernous, book-lined office that smelled of leather and old paper. I didn't waste any time. The words tumbled out of me in a frantic, desperate torrent. I told him everything. The Thanksgiving party. Finding Nana in the basement. Her words, solid foundation. My uncle's behavior. The stolen diary. Finding the hidden box. The trust document naming him as trustee. My uncle's power of attorney. The online bank records. The massive withdrawals. The country club dues. My confrontation with my mother. The race back to the house to retrieve the box. The whole sordid, ugly story. Throughout my entire monologue, he just listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just stood by his window, his back to me, looking out over the city skyline. When I was finally done, breathless and emotionally spent, the silence in the room was deafening. I was sure he was going to dismiss me, to tell me it was a family matter, to call security. Instead, he turned around slowly, and for the first time, I saw the emotion on his face. It was a deep, profound sadness, mixed with a cold, simmering anger. "Joseph warned me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He always said that Mark had a hole in his soul where his integrity was supposed to be. I just never imagined he would sink this low. To do this to his own mother." He walked over to his desk and sat down, his movements heavy with a sudden weariness. "Let me see the documents." I opened the tin box and laid the contents on his desk. The will, the trust, my grandfather's handwritten ledger. He picked up the trust document, his long, thin fingers tracing my grandfather's signature. "I drafted this myself, over 30 years ago," he said, a nostalgic sadness in his voice. Joe was adamant. "Protect Evie," he told me. "Protect her from the world, and protect her from our son." He read through the ledger, his expression hardening with each entry. "I knew about some of these," he murmured, "but not all of them. The boy was a leech his entire life." Finally, I showed him the screenshots on my phone, the digital proof of the ongoing theft. He scrolled through them, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He saw the transfers to Vance Capital Management. He saw the luxury vacations. When he was done, he placed the phone down on his desk and looked at me, his eyes blazing with a righteous fury. "What your uncle has done is not just a breach of trust," he said, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. "It is a violation of state and federal law, financial elder abuse, grand larceny, wire fraud. He didn't just borrow from his mother, he committed a series of felonies. And your mother, by choosing to ignore it and warn him, has made herself an accessory after the fact." The validation I felt in that moment was so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. And now, I had a powerful ally. Howard Attinger became a man of action. He picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to a judge, an old friend, explaining he needed an emergency injunction filed immediately. "I need you to freeze the assets of the Evelyn Vance Family Trust and all assets held by Mark Vance and his shell corporation, Vance Capital Management," he commanded into the phone. "And I need an emergency order stripping Mark Vance of his power of attorney and granting temporary guardianship of Evelyn Vance to my office, pending a full hearing." The second call was to a man named Sergeant Detectives in the Financial Crimes Unit of the City Police Department. "Frank," he said, "it's Howard Attinger. I've got a case for you that's going to make your year. And I have a witness and a mountain of evidence sitting in my office right now. How soon can you get here?" Within the hour, the wheels of justice were turning with a speed and ferocity I could have never achieved on my own. The emergency orders were being drafted. The detectives were on their way. I had brought the torch, but Howard Attinger was the one who knew exactly how and where to set the fire. As I sat in his office, the adrenaline finally beginning to fade, I knew that there was no going back. The family I had grown up with was about to be obliterated, but my grandmother, for the first time in years, was finally going to be safe. The immediate aftermath of my meeting with Howard Attinger was a whirlwind of legal and police action that felt both terrifying and profoundly liberating. The 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit arrived at the law office within the hour. They were professionals, a man and a woman, both with tired, cynical eyes that told me they had seen the worst of human nature many times before. I sat with them in that mahogany-lined conference room and told my story again from the beginning. This time, it was different. I wasn't a desperate nephew trying to convince a skeptical lawyer. I was a key witness in a major criminal investigation, with Howard Attinger by my side, providing the legal framework and corroborating my grandfather's intentions. My story and the evidence I brought were treated with the gravity they deserved. I handed over the thumb drive with the bank records. I gave them a sworn statement detailing everything I had seen and heard. They took the original documents from the tin box, the will, the trust, the ledger as evidence, carefully placing them in sealed bags. Watching them handle those intimate pieces of my family's history felt like a violation, but I knew it was a necessary one. These were no longer just relics of a loving marriage. They were exhibits in a felony case. The most difficult part was agreeing to what came next. The detectives explained that, with the emergency court orders in place, their first priority was to secure my grandmother and ensure her well-being. This meant a visit from Adult Protective Services, accompanied by police officers, to my uncle's home where she was currently staying. They had to officially remove her from his care. "It will be jarring for her, son," the older detective told me, his voice not unkind. "But it's for her own good. We have to treat that house as a potential crime scene." They also needed to execute a search warrant on my uncle's house and office to seize his computers, his financial records, and the little leather diary he had taken from Nana. The thought of my aunt and cousins being subjected to a police raid, of seeing their father arrested, filled me with a deep, sickening dread. He was a criminal, but they were still, in some twisted way, my family. That evening, the storm broke. Howard called me and told me it was done. The APS workers, along with 2 uniformed officers, had gone to my uncle's house. My Aunt Karen had apparently thrown a hysterical fit, screaming about their rights and her husband's reputation, but the court order was undeniable. They had taken Nana to a safe, neutral location, a highly rated care facility with a specialized memory care unit, where she would be evaluated by doctors and kept comfortable and secure until a permanent guardianship solution could be found. Simultaneously, the detectives had raided Mark's office, confiscating everything. Mark himself had been arrested at his country club, taken into custody in the middle of a business lunch. The public humiliation he had so feared was now a reality. The phone calls started almost immediately. First, from my hysterical aunt, leaving a sobbing, screaming voicemail on my phone, calling me a monster, a traitor, a snake who had destroyed their family. Then, the one I had been dreading most, my father. His voice was hollow, filled with a grief and confusion that was almost worse than my mother's anger. "Alex, what have you done?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Your uncle is in jail. Your mother is completely falling apart. They took Nana away. This whole thing is a nightmare." I tried to explain, to tell him about the proof, about the lawyer, about the years of theft, but he couldn't hear it. "He's your uncle, Alex. He's blood. You don't do this to family." He hung up, and in that moment, I felt the final, painful severing of the ties that had bound us. I had chosen my grandmother's safety over my family's comfort, and in their eyes, that was an unforgivable sin. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and isolation. My parents refused to speak to me. The rest of my extended family fed a steady diet of lies from my aunt about my supposed vendetta against Mark, treated me like a pariah. I was completely alone, supported only by Howard Attinger, who treated me with a gruff, paternal kindness. He handled everything, acting as a shield between me and the fallout. The evidence against my uncle was overwhelming. The records seized from his office and the data from his computers painted a picture of a man living far beyond his means, running a failing business that he was propping up with a constant infusion of his mother's money. The fraud was deeper and more extensive than I had even realized. He had taken out loans in her name, remortgaged her house, and sold off stocks that were supposed to be the bedrock of her trust. Nana's little leather diary was recovered from a locked drawer in his desk. It was just as I had suspected, a heartbreaking, fragmented account of her growing fear and confusion. "Mark was angry today," one entry read. "He said I was confused about the money. But Joe's ledger is safe. The foundation is safe. She knew what he was doing, but she was powerless to stop it. So she had done the only thing she could. She had hidden the proof." Faced with an avalanche of evidence and the testimony of a respected lawyer like Howard, my uncle's legal position was hopeless. His high-priced lawyers quickly arranged a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of felony financial elder abuse and grand larceny. My mother, in a desperate attempt to protect her brother, had initially lied to investigators, claiming she was aware of the loans and had approved them. She was charged with obstruction of justice, a lesser crime, but a crime nonetheless. She received probation and a hefty fine, her reputation in her community shattered. The fallout was absolute. My uncle was sentenced to 5 to 7 years in state prison. Their McMansion was sold to pay for legal fees and to begin the process of restitution to my grandmother's savaged estate. My Aunt Karen moved in with her sister in another state, taking my cousins with her. The family, as I had known it, had ceased to exist. It had been a hollow, rotten structure, and I had been the one to push it over. There was no victory in it, only a profound, aching sadness for the family I thought I had, and the one I had been forced to destroy. It's been almost 2 years since that Thanksgiving. The storm has passed, and what remains is a quiet, altered landscape. The legal battles are over, the dust has settled, and a new, fragile kind of normalcy has taken root. My Uncle Mark is still in prison. He'll be eligible for parole next year, but he's a ghost to me now, a character from a past life I no longer recognize. My relationship with my parents is complicated. It's a work in progress. For the first year, there was nothing but a painful, echoing silence between us. But time, and perhaps the undeniable reality of my uncle's conviction, has slowly, painstakingly, started to build a fragile bridge back. My mother, humbled by her probation and forced to confront the truth she had so desperately tried to deny, eventually reached out. The first conversation was stilted, full of unspoken accusations and deep-seated hurt. But it was a start. We don't talk about what happened, not really. We may never be able to. The betrayal runs too deep. But we talk, we meet for coffee. We are learning to be a different kind of family. One built not on comfortable illusions, but on the hard, scarred ground of a difficult truth. It is not what it was, but perhaps, in its own way, it is more honest. The real story, the one that matters, is about my Nana Evelyn. The change in her since she was removed from that toxic, terrifying environment has been nothing short of miraculous. Howard Attinger, true to his word and to the memory of his old friend, became her legal guardian. He used the recovered funds and the proceeds from selling her house, a place that now held too many dark memories, to move her into the best care facility in the state. It's a beautiful place, with gardens and art classes and a staff that treats her with dignity and kindness. With proper medical care, nutrition, and, most importantly, a sense of safety, the fog of fear and confusion that had enveloped her began to lift. She still has good days and bad days, as is the nature of her age, but the good days are more frequent now. The fire I remembered from my childhood has returned to her eyes. She remembers my name every time I visit. We play gin rummy and she still cheats, a sign that the old Nana is truly back. We talk for hours. One day, sitting with her in the sunlit garden of her new home, I finally worked up the courage to ask her about that day. "Nana," I said gently, "do you remember that Thanksgiving, when I found you in the basement?" She looked at a distant bird for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "I remember being cold," she said, her voice clear. "And I remember being afraid. Mark. He was always so angry about the money. He kept telling me I didn't need it, that I was being selfish. He wanted me to sign papers I didn't understand. It was like he was trying to erase your grandfather, trying to tear down the house Joe built." She looked at me, her eyes sharp and lucid. I knew Joe had hidden his papers, the real papers, somewhere safe, somewhere solid. I just couldn't always remember where, but I knew I had to protect them. So I hid, too. Her words confirmed everything. She hadn't been a crazy old woman rambling nonsense. She had been a fighter, using the only tools she had left, her fragmented memories and her fierce love for my grandfather, to protect herself and the truth. She was the hero of this story. I was just the one who finally listened. As for me, I'm different. That experience, as traumatic as it was, forged something new in me. I changed my career path. I went back to school and got a degree in social work, with a focus on elder advocacy. I now work for a nonprofit that helps families navigate the complexities of elder care and investigates claims of abuse. I spend my days fighting for people like my grandmother, for the vulnerable and the voiceless. I tell my story, a carefully anonymized version of it, to families, to police recruits, to bank tellers, teaching them to recognize the subtle red flags of elder abuse. I teach them that it doesn't always look like a movie villain. Sometimes it looks like a charming, helpful son. I turned the ugliest chapter of my life into my life's purpose. The journey was brutal. I lost the family I thought I had. I navigated a world of betrayal and deceit that I never could have imagined. But in the end, I found something more valuable. I found my grandmother again. I found a purpose. And I found a new definition of family, one that isn't just about blood, but about who you fight for, who you protect, and who you show up for when they are shivering in the dark. The foundation of my old family was rotten, but I'm building a new one now, on solid ground. And it's a foundation that no one will ever be able to tear down. Thank you for listening.